Okay. Okay. So today is August 11th, 2024. Continuing interview with Susan Walters about her life. So I think where we stopped last was basically the end of your childhood and moving into your 20s.
Okay.
You had talked about how you went to computer school
Yes.
and how that ended. So and then we'll move into you meeting dad and starting family. But before that time, before you met dad, is there anything you want to talk about in your 20s outside of what we already did talk about?
Well, I think, I kind of have to mention the fact that I was married and divorced, that I had no indication through all my entire life that I was able to have children. The light just went out, the screen just went out.
That's okay.
Okay.
It's still going.
So I just had no idea that I was going to be able to have children because it simply hadn't happened. And I'd gone to, the doctors and they were just, I don't know, maybe we'll see what happens, just relax. So when I met your dad,
How old were you at that time?
gosh, that was 40 years ago. So what am I? I was in my late 30s.
Could you clip that a little higher?
Okay.
Yeah.
Probably mid 30s. So we decided to go ahead and get married.
Where'd you meet? Tell us a little bit about.
Okay, I can do that. I'm sorry, I have to backtrack. So before I met your dad, I was a foster parent. And I had two children, two young women who had some retardation. I started with Ruby and Tina, who were sisters, and they were in their mid-teens when I first got them. Kept Ruby for many years. Tina, for reasons I don't know, she wasn't happy. Maybe it was, I have no idea, but she eventually wanted to move. So that was a choice she could make, and that was fine. But I kept Ruby until she graduated from her schooling and then, went on to take a job and that sort of thing. And she no longer needed parental care. She was able to move into an independent living situation.
Oh, okay.
And my mother kept in touch with her for quite some time, and she was thriving. She did beautifully. So was really relieved about that.
Great. What was the nature of her?
She was mildly, a little. She could read and she could do simple math, but she had retardation, not to kind of like the middle degree.
Okay.
Tina had more. She had slightly more retardation, and for reasons that no one can ever explain, she and Ruby had the same experience. Ruby did fine, Tina did not. In the house that she was in before, in my house, I believe that she had other mental health issues that had nothing to do with anything other than she had her own issues.
Yeah, right.
So the last I heard from or about Ruby, she had gotten married and had a little one.
Oh.
And she married a young man who was somewhat impaired. And his parents were guiding them. I guess they had a little cottage where the kids lived, and the parents were right there. And at that point, both my mom and I kind of lost contact because I was a very small part of her life. She had gone on to do much better things, and
How many years ago?
Oh my gosh, I don't know.
Because Grandma passed away.
Well, she was around
5 years ago.
Maybe
4 years ago.
Probably more than. Well, for what? I mean, for what exactly?
For when she was in touch with Ruby.
Oh, yeah, it was probably 4 or 5 years ago. It was just before she died.
Oh, she was still in touch even then.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
But I mean, on a very random basis.
Gotcha.
At first, we were all in touch with each other for a while, and then I talked to the social worker that I had worked with, and she said, she's adjusting really well. It's time for you to fade away. And I thought, okay.
Yeah.
That's perfectly logical. So that's exactly what I did.
But it sounds like if Grandma, your mom, was staying in touch, she had been like part of the family.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
Oh yeah. I mean, we included them in everything for those years that they stayed with me, which is maybe only 5. I can't quite remember. 4 for Tina and 5 for Tina.
This is something I don't know much about.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I can visualize them. I can hear their voices, but I can't tell you when it was.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fine.
And
Well, this would have been because you met Dad in your 30s, and I
Yeah.
imagine all that had been.
so this would have been in my earlier 30s.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that probably took up a lot of your time, right?
It did. It did, yes.
Were you working at this time?
I think I was working part-time.
Do you remember what you were doing?
Not really. Whatever it was, I wasn't doing much of it. Oh, I do know. It just kind of occurred to me. Where we lived at the time, there was a Dunkin' Donuts like literally around the corner.
Yeah.
So I worked there because I could get back and forth to work really quickly.
That's fine. I didn't know you worked at Dunkin' Donuts.
And I didn't get my driver's license until I was in my 30s.
Really?
I just didn't. The first couple driving lessons I had were with my dad.
Okay.
And part of my dad's job at the time and for many years was every time there was a traffic accident, as the prosecuting attorney, if there was something wrong, he had to go to the scene. He had to witness all the horrible things that happened. And so when we got into the car for him to teach me how to drive, which was a mistake, he was always concerned about every little thing because he knew.
Yeah.
And he made it. It just made it so difficult that I just said, "Never mind. I'll do it later."
Yeah.
And of course, I did eventually. I went to a professional driving school and got my driver's license right away. But it was traumatic for both my dad and I. We just decided to leave it alone.
Yeah. Maybe not the best environment to learn.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. I worked, as you know, on the claims side of insurance for several years in personal injury. Yeah, and that's like what your dad saw was much more intense, like being on the scene. But even just like the descriptions and the aftermath of accidents make me much more careful about driving and thinking about driving. I never want to ride a motorcycle.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
Those accidents don't tend to end well.
No.
But so was that hard to learn?
I was very apprehensive because I'd been taught to be afraid, and
Right.
but I did. I mean, I took the class and I passed my test on the first time, and by then I was feeling a little more confident. And now, of course, I just drive. Well, now I'm not driving anymore because my hands are so bad. But so for years I taxied you guys all around.
Yeah.
You went to a school that was far away from our house. So, and I worked in a different school, so I was driving 45 minutes to an hour every day just to get to work, and then another hour or so to get you all home.
Plenty of practice. But.
Yeah, plenty of practice.
All right, so no more foster kids.
Right.
You got your driver's license, working at Dunkin' Donuts, and then you meet Dad. How'd that happen?
I'm thinking. Oh, I met him when I still had the foster kids. He was he was the supervisor of my casework. So he wasn't directly involved in that, but with the girls, it got to a point where it was really hard to, after it was Bill was my husband at the time, we decided to break up, and then that broke up everything. And Ruby stayed with me for a little while after that, but then she aged out of the program.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So it's just you and Ruby.
So it was just Ruby and I. And Tina had gone to another family, and she thrived in a family where there were a bunch of kids. And I guess they had a couple of dogs, and she was perfect. It was just exactly what she needed. But I was a bit much quieter household. So
Yeah, right.
but working with those children, and then of course I worked in a school with handicapped children. They demonstrated every day a courage that I couldn't even imagine at the time. That these are people who get up in pain. They have to work so hard to do the simplest things. You can just see the struggle in their faces sometimes. And it's you want to be able to say, oh, let me do that. But of course that's the wrong thing to do, because in the long run they need to know how to do as much as they possibly can.
Yeah.
So I loved doing that. I loved having the kids in the house. I loved working in the school. And in the school where I worked, we had so many totally profoundly handicapped children. Kids who were in wheelchairs, one kid I remember in particular, he had the best smile. He had this angelic smile. He was very small for his age. He was a teenager, but he was about the size of an 8-year-old. Mm-hmm. And that was part of the whole situation with him. And he had to sit in a wheelchair and had to strap him in because he couldn't hold his body weight.
Yeah.
But we got to go into the pool, and you could put this kid in the water, and I could lift him up, and you could put him in the water, and he could move everything, and he could float. And it was the most incredible thing to see. And he laughed from the second we got him in to the second we got him out. He just laughed for the whole time we were there. And other kids who just, being in the pool, and my being lucky enough to work in the pool, gave me the opportunity with every kid. We did the fun stuff, you know. We didn't have to make. Joyce was my supervisor. She was a licensed lifeguard and all that sort of thing. And I don't know how I ended up in the pool, but they just put me there, and it turned out to be the best thing for a long time.
You got that and the greenhouse.
Oh yeah, greenhouse came later after they closed the pool. Yeah. But it was an extraordinary experience, and I'm so glad that I was able to spend that time. It just, it kind of makes you have faith in the human race.
Oh, that's
to see, you know, these children were so handicapped on so many levels, and they fought every single day. They got up every single day. They went through their days the best way they could, usually with a smile on their face. Although we had a couple who had, one girl in particular, her name was Dawn, and I loved Dawn. She was my favorite. I hate to say that, but it was true. She was able to talk. She could read and write a little bit, but she had a few mental issues and emotional issues, and when she got mad, she was likely to just throw off all her clothes and run down the hallway saying, "I'm going to pee on the floor, I'm going to pee on the floor." And occasionally she did, but I never raised my voice to her. I always just would say, "Okay, why don't we try this?" And I would be as patient as I could, because she needed it. And I needed it too, because she could have driven me out of my mind. But she started calling me Miss Susan, which was a big step forward. And she would cooperate with me in a way that she never cooperated with anybody else.
She really made a lot of strides with this particular
And then
student.
she went into a different classroom with a teacher who was quite rigid.
She regressed.
Oh, she did regress. It was really sad to see. It just made me furious. But you know, and theoretically, if you're working with children like this, they have this IEP, and you're supposed to follow it exactly the way it's written, which doesn't always make sense, because you can't write the same program for every child. Mm-hmm. You have to give those kids some breathing space.
Right.
But then, for reasons I never understood, nobody ever did really, this lady died, and she left money to build a greenhouse, specifically to build a greenhouse for the school. And I don't think she was a woman who had any contact with the school. She didn't have a student there. Why she did this, we don't know. But she did. So I think, we all thought, oh, one of those little tent greenhouses that you put in your backyard. It was not.
Yeah.
It was a huge greenhouse.
And she specifically wanted a greenhouse.
That was, specific. That was, you couldn't keep the money unless you were going to build the greenhouse, period. That was all there was to it. So nobody wanted to work in the greenhouse. They just thought, oh, this would be horrible and it's too much work. Yeah.
Because this was huge, right?
Oh, it's huge. But
Do you know how much she left? Was it?
I don't have any idea.
Okay, probably in the millions.
I would guess
like
it was a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
Because that thing cost a lot of money. But so I asked the principal if I could give it a try. Mm-hmm. And out of desperation, he said, sure.
It's like the last thing they wanted to.
Because I'm not a teacher, so the teachers had to be present during whatever. They would bring their students to me.
Yeah.
And we would stay in the greenhouse and work whatever project we were working, and then the teachers would generally, after they'd been there for a while, they would go off and have a break or whatever. But we did things like we planted a vegetable garden, and we started all of the seedlings, all of the plants from seeds, and we watched them grow in the greenhouse.
So just to be clear, since we're recording this, it's just so the timeline's clear. This is when you were in your, we were in our teens, right?
Probably.
Ish. Because we kind of jumped ahead in the
timeline.
Not
you necessarily. But
okay, I might have been a little younger. But just so we're clear, in the time, we jumped ahead a bit. That's where we are. We'll go back, but keep.
Yeah, I was still shuffling you back and forth to elementary, and then shuffling the girls to somewhere else.
Right.
Then getting to school, and then doing the reverse on the way back. So I'm guessing you were maybe 12.
Okay.
Okay.
That's fine. It's not a big deal.
But for me personally, this was my dream job. I had no idea it existed. I had no idea what I was walking into. But when I got there, it was like, oh, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing.
The greenhouse or the school?
The greenhouse.
Yeah, and that's not a job you could apply for because they
no.
they didn't want it really to exist. It just they happen to have a greenhouse.
It fell into my lap. I had been there working on as what they called a one-on-one with this one particular girl, who the one who would pee on the floor, and she could swear. She was very good. It was very impressive.
Nice.
But because I had done well with her, the principal, who didn't know what the heck to do about the greenhouse, just said, "You want to run the greenhouse?" I said, "Sure."
So how many years were you in the greenhouse? Because if I remember right, they had to stop supporting it?
I think it reached the point where the maintenance on it was much too much.
Yeah.
Oh, and that was the time I was ready to not work anymore, and I can't remember, was I sick at that time?
Not sure.
I can't remember.
Did you work at the greenhouse up to the point where you retired?
Yeah, I guess maybe I did.
Okay.
I'm not sure that that's the case, though, but probably.
I want to say that you had to move away from it and you weren't happy, but I kind of remember that.
Yeah, I saw during the course of the week, I saw every student who was in the school.
Yeah.
And I had to have different things going on for each age level, for each technical level. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a trained teacher. And then there was this one.
It was all you? There wasn't another teacher to help?
No, just me.
Okay.
So there were a couple of teachers who were who thought that I was trying to usurp their powers. It was just they kind of just got real snotty about it, and then eventually, I guess that they said, well, she can't be in there because she's not a teacher and all that sort of thing.
Okay, I kind of remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what happened. I think after I left, I don't think anybody really took over the greenhouse.
It's a shame, so it just kind of.
So probably... a few people would wander in and out. I have no idea what happened after that. But it was really sad, and I thought, what a shame. But
was the duck the guy's name, the principal?
Yeah, his name was Larry Duck.
Larry Duck. Yeah, you did not like Larry Duck.
Actually, it was Larry who tried to help me.
Oh, we like Larry. Okay.
A lot of people didn't like him, but I always found him an odd duck. No pun intended.
What a great last name, Duck.
Yeah, but he
Was it spelled D-U-C-K?
D-U-C-K.
Mr. Duck.
He would wander into the greenhouse once in a while. Apparently, he was an old farmer. How he ended up as the principal of school, I don't know, but he grew up on a farm. So he would wander into the greenhouse now and then, and I had this massive aquarium in the lobby.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and then I had a small swimming pool, a children's pool, and we had other fish there, and I had some water plants there.
You had a goldfish, too, didn't you?
Yeah, the goldfish. Several of the goldfish in that pond got pretty darn big.
Yeah.
I had no idea. Oh, and of course...
So I had asked you why you made the decision to foster, to not only foster, but to foster handicapped children. Because you didn't really have experience with handicapped children at that time,
I had no experience whatsoever.
Yeah, okay. Because you had probably made that decision, in your late 20s, something like that?
I think. A person we knew...
This was your...
Yeah, the other husband.
Yes.
This was a man that he worked with, and he was telling my husband about the fact that they'd had taken in these kids, and I thought, wow, that's interesting. So, and up until the time that Emily was born, I did not believe I could have children of my own, and I wanted kids. So, because my husband was influenced by this man, we decided to go ahead and take these kids in.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it was a good decision, and I'm very glad I did it. I would never have regretted it. But I did discover it's like with any other family, with any other bunch of kids, they're not the same. So Ruby was good. Her sister needed a different family. And we did our best, those parents and myself, by now I was on my own, to make sure that the girls got together as much as possible. But even at that, they kind of grew away from each other, as sometimes happens when you get into your late teens and early 20s. And of course, within that program, within that system, you age out at 18, and then you either live on your own independently with a social worker hanging around, or you go into
Group setting?
a group setting. So there aren't too many, there's always someone there to take care of them, but it's always not always the best option. And I couldn't keep them anymore because they aged out of the program, or Ruby did, and Tina was right behind her. But as I say, we kept talk for a long time, and my mother was the one who kept in touch much longer.
Right.
And she used to send them checks for Christmas and stuff.
Oh, that's nice.
It was like...
They're part of the family,
Yeah. And she'd never had any experience either with children with handicaps.
And she didn't, at that time, have any grandkids. Or maybe Buddy and Danny. No, they wouldn't have been.
You guys are the oldest. And no, we didn't have...
Right.
At that point, I had truly given up on the idea that I would ever have kids.
Right.
So it never occurred to me when I married your dad to use birth control, because I just didn't... I was sad about that, but I didn't do anything to pretend.
Yeah.
Because I didn't think I could.
So it's maybe been a Bill problem, not a you problem.
I have no idea. I really don't know.
Okay. All right, so let's go to when you met Dad. So Dad was the caseworker for Ruby, and what was the other? Tina. So he would come in and check on them, right?
Yeah, your dad was the supervisor of my social worker.
Okay.
So I would see him maybe once or twice a year. I would see the social worker, whose name was, I forgot. She would come in every couple of months and just, check, make sure the girls were okay, make sure there was food in the pantry, and because they paid me some money to take care of this, and I had to. It wasn't a lot. It was enough to keep food and and clothing.
I didn't know that was an element of fostering.
Yeah.
Is that always an element of fostering, or?
I'm not sure. Maybe I'm sure it must be on some level, but
is it mostly just to pay for the?
It's to pay for them.
Yeah, just for the food and
And
stuff.
of course, I had to keep books. So the social worker would come in, we'd go over the books, she'd look over the kids, they were clean. We had a dog, but the dog lived outside, so that was okay.
Did they surprise you, or did they like schedule the
Sometimes
visits?
they would schedule, and sometimes they would just pop in. And really, I mean, I did my best to take care of the kids, and the girls were. Ruby was quite happy. Tina just needed a different family.
Yeah.
And she thrived in her new family
Right.
because they had other kids. Ruby stayed with me, as I say, till she aged out of the program. And then she got married.
Right.
So, and then her husband's family kind of took them over.
Yeah. You mentioned
And
that.
I just kind of thought, I need to
Yeah.
step away.
Okay, so Dad, then you were single,
Yeah.
right? So what happened next?
Well, while I still had the girls, as I say, we had I think Beverly was her name. Beverly would come in a couple times, every couple of months, and your dad had to come in a couple times during the year. He was the one who had to go over the books with me and that
Yep.
sort of thing.
What was he like back then?
He was interesting. He had traveled to New York a number of times. He'd been to Europe a couple of times. He liked to go to the opera,
He's a man of culture,
and well,
I
surprisingly,
guess.
not necessarily, but I
I
mean,
might be a little generous, yeah.
but this man that he knew, who had been his English professor when he was in college, and your dad's dad had died very early in his teen years, and this man Tom, who probably the age of his dad, they kind of developed a bond, and he and Tom had a wife and at that point several kids, but they would include him on their New York trips sometimes.
Right.
And they would take him up to Rockport, which is where we used to go for vacations, and they'd spend the summer up there. So he had this interesting relationship with his family. At the same time, he was kind of estranged from his mother. And I don't quite know what that was all about.
That was just, they resolved that, right? Or were they always estranged?
I think when his dad died and his mom had to go out to work, things sort of fell apart. And, she did the best she could.
Yeah.
But she was also, she was a difficult woman. She could be. And then she developed cancer toward the end of her life, and they got much closer then.
Okay.
Because he spent time taking her back and forth to the clinic and the other things. So they did finally reconcile, and then she did die. But I was glad that they did. After we got married, he and Tom would do things together. They would, I don't know, but eventually Tom just disappeared from our lives too, which was fine with me.
This is Tom, his friend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what's his last name again?
Good question.
Tom, what is it?
No idea. Can't remember now.
This was his professor, though. We
It was a
visited in
professor.
Rockport, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, what was his name? Okay, anyway, we'll think of it.
But so
Not Uncle Tom, to be clear.
No,
Uncle
not
Tom
Uncle
did not
Tom.
disappear. That would be, we would not be happy about that.
No, I would not be happy about that. But after he kind of, this Tom faded into the background, and I think it was after his wife, I know what it was. After his wife died, Tom's wife, he sold the house in Youngstown and he moved up to Rockport. So he was out of our reach for most of the time, which was really good. I was fine with that.
You did not like Tom.
I did not. I mean, he just was, he wanted to just absorb everything. He wanted to be in command of whoever he was around.
Yeah, right.
And you may have noticed that that's not necessarily my personality.
So we were talking about what Dad was like when you met him. So you said he was, he was a world traveler and he went to New York. So you like that? That was intriguing.
I thought there was a real sophistication about that.
Okay,
a maturity about that.
Yeah. He was a singer, right?
Yeah.
He probably sang for you.
He sang and he sang and he studied opera for a long time.
Yeah.
He went to Pittsburgh once a week to study with a woman whose father was a quite famous opera singer.
Do you remember your first date? What did you do?
Because I had known him for several years with the girls, it wasn't like remarkable. I mean, after the girls left, then he could say, "Would you like to go out to dinner with me?" And I said, "Sure." And I met a man who was dedicated to his work, or so I thought, who took an interest, like in the girls, and were they okay, and was I doing all right, and all this sort of thing.
Right.
I ended up marrying a man who was not quite all of those things.
Right. Complex individual.
Sure. And there were things that I discovered as we'd been together for some time, married for some time, that, as I'm sure happens in any marriage, anywhere along the line, you just think, the hell, man, what are you doing?
Yeah. Well, like anybody, put your best foot forward for the first, then you'll learn.
He was...
get under the layers of somebody, you learn.
The one thing your dad did not understand, and he never understood, was that you cannot spend more money than you have.
Yeah, right.
So he would say, "Oh, by the way, this is in January, I made our reservations for Rockport this year. We're going to be blah, blah, blah." And I'm thinking, are you nuts? We can't afford this. And he could not hear that sentence, "We cannot afford to do this." It just went right over his head.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time worrying about money, and he spent absolutely no time worrying about money.
Well, let's go back to the early.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm trying to keep things like kind of sequential in timeline. So we'll get there.
Okay.
We're not there yet. Now you're just getting to know each other.
As I said, I had a chance over the year or so.
So you kind of know more.
That we had conversations when he would come over. And, he talked about his life and his being able to go to, he was, the year before we got married, I think, he had another big long trip to Europe, and he was gone for like 6 weeks or something. And I just thought, wow, this is really great. I'd love to be able to do that. Just to go ahead and plan and do something like that.
Yeah.
And this would have been after I broke up with my husband, so just so we know.
To be clear. Yeah.
To be clear.
Got it.
He invited me to go to the Youngstown Orchestra, and they were doing an opera, and would I like to go? Well, I had started watching the Metropolitan Opera on Saturday afternoons on television, and I found it fascinating. I enjoyed it. I thought the music, for the most part, was quite beautiful. The staging was always incredible, but it was the Met, So I said, sure. And it was the first one I had ever seen in person. Mm-hmm. And it was really a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
So we would go to the symphony, and the Youngstown Symphony was not horrible.
They're fine.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about back then, but when you used to take me, they seemed like a...
Yeah, they were great. I mean, they were very good. They certainly didn't come up to the same standards as some,
right.
But they were more than passable.
For the size of Youngstown, yeah, pretty.
And they had a
nice.
pretty good audience for the size of Youngstown. And it was that company that also put on the opera. They brought in professional singers for the most part. But your dad had a part in one of them. I can't remember if it was that one.
In the opera?
Yeah, I mean, he was part of one of the choruses.
Oh, really? Oh, so at the actual symphony orchestra?
Yeah,
Oh, wow. So you're in the audience?
yeah.
Well, you're probably really impressed, right?
Well, I'd heard him sing before. He was pretty good.
Yeah.
The thing about that was, of course, that the rehearsals just took up all of his time,
Right.
and so when he did a fine job on it. His voice was fine. He wasn't a very good actor, though. He's kind of stiff.
Oh, he was acting?
Well, he was in part of the chorus, and I'm trying to think
Oh,
about
man.
which opera it was, but it was. I can hear the music, and it's like they have soldiers or something, and they had to march. I don't know what. I can't remember the whole thing.
Was he a soldier?
But he had a very small part.
Okay.
And he had and mostly the chorus, and I think he had a couple of lines on his own.
Gotcha.
But the production was pretty decent. And then we started going to New York, and then we went to the Met,
Yeah.
and it's like a whole different, completely different kind of situation. But it was really a wonderful experience. I'm so glad that I was able to do that.
I'm going to restart this video. Okay.
And we went to a lot of plays. We went to Broadway plays. We saw the opening, the first showing of Sweeney Todd
Oh, wait, where?
in New York.
You saw the very first?
Very first one. It wasn't even like wasn't an official opening. It was like the last
Was that the first introduction? Like
Yeah,
the first
yeah.
show of Sweeney Todd ever?
ever.
You were there?
Yeah,
That is very cool.
it was cool.
Huh.
And it's
Interesting.
such a bizarre show.
I didn't know that. Okay.
But we saw a number of operas. We would go to the symphony, and they would put on one opera a year with professionals. And then on the couple of trips to New York, we always included at least one opera.
So you were out, you were traveling, well, this was over a course of probably years, but
Yeah.
So it sounds like, okay, you were traveling quite a bit.
Yeah.
Quite a bit. Dad never flew, right? So you're always driving. Oh, no, he did fly because he would have flown to Europe, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so he did- he
Pretty
did
hard to
fly.
drive to Europe.
Okay, great.
But,
I know he took a cruise,
Yeah.
but
And we always talked about, he said, well, we would be able to do that too, but of course it didn't work out that way.
go to Europe.
Yeah. So he was a good guy. I'm not saying he wasn't, but he did not understand about money.
Yeah. Money, yeah. Well, it's hard to do fun stuff like that, you do have to spend money.
You do have to spend money, and that credit cards are not money.
Yes.
So finally, he had to declare bankruptcy, thank God, because he gave me the checkbook finally.
Well, you're getting way ahead now.
Yeah,
This was when I graduated high
Yeah.
school.
but
Yes, eventually, yeah.
we kind of, it's maddening to me now that I think about it, and don't like to think about it much, that we struggled financially, and we didn't. It wasn't necessary. He made enough money that we shouldn't have had to struggle. But just things like getting you guys clothes for school and that sort of thing was hard because I didn't know where the money was going to come from.
Right.
And you can only do so much on credit. So I spent double time worrying about it, and he spent no time worrying about it.
So, okay, you eventually got married.
Mm.
Do you remember how long you dated?
It didn't seem like it was a very, very long time, but I'd known him
Yeah.
for a couple of years.
Like a year or two? Or?
And I think at least 2 years.
Okay.
And what I knew about him was his professional side, which was, part of his job was to check and follow the money that I was spending on the girls and making sure that I was spending the money I got paid to pay
Tracking finances. That's a good
tracking
life skill.
finances. So I assumed he knew how to do that. which was and it was interesting because he would never show me the checkbook. And I said, oh, why not? He said, well, I've got this, don't worry about it. And it made me nervous because I always handled the checkbook. And, I've always had my own system. I did, I knew what I knew. I knew how much money I had, all this stuff, and I didn't know any of those things. that which turned out to be rather disastrous. But anyway, it was an adjustment. But every time, you know, you can't really know a person until you live with them.
Yep.
And I'm sure that you and Megan have had times where you just go, wait a minute, I didn't know that about you, or you know, that isn't the way I expected it to be. Because it happens to everyone, and if you have to be flexible. And I always tried, but that at some point you just have to say, this is nuts.
So let's talk about, so you got married. How soon after was Emily born? Or was it like pretty soon?
Like almost.
Like 9 months?
She was born about 8 months after we were married.
So it must have came as a surprise because you didn't think
you can't even imagine. And she was 6 weeks early. She was the tiniest baby. I mean, I was terrified. They handed me this little tiny bundle, and she was no bigger than a baby doll. And there's somewhere in the house, there's this little picture of her. She's on her tummy, and she's got these tiny, skinny little legs and arms, but she managed to pull herself up, and she's moving her head around. And her head is a third of the size of her whole body. And the fact that she could hold it up was astonishing. And she was only 6 weeks older, so I just, my God.
Yeah.
But she thrived, she gained weight, thank goodness, because she was so tiny. And I had no experience with a tiny baby. Well, I had no experience with any baby other than my sister. And the second they handed her to me, my first thought was, oh, this child is just beautiful. This is such a beautiful child. And my second thought was, I have no idea what the hell to do now. But we muddled through, and she taught me a whole lot about how to take care of a baby, because she, you know, you have to listen and you have to pay attention. And the thing I learned about children is after having 3 of them, every one of them is different, and you have to adjust every single time. And you have to, and then of course you have the other kids to worry about. By the time you came along, you know, they were already, you had these 2 big sisters who were going in different directions, and then I had you. And not that I regret that for a second. I think I never expected to have 3 children. And the fact that I found out I was pregnant with you was just wow. Wow. And then I saw your little face, and each of you took my breath away. Each of you, for totally different reasons, are amazing people. And I feel honored. I feel honored that I had the opportunity to raise you. And I spent so many times just trying to think, okay, how do I do this? How do I do this? I don't know how. And you taught me. You all taught me. And you all taught me different things because you were completely different people. And I think that that was very helpful, because I love you each dearly, but you are totally your own people. And that's the way it should be. And I'm so happy that I was wise enough to let you become yourselves.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, like there's some parents try to mold their kids in a certain way.
Oh, they have this expectations from the day the child is born. Oh, he's going to be this or she's going to be that.
Yeah, follow in the family, you know, your dad's footsteps and become a I don't know, a
lawyer, doctor,
organist, or
yeah.
I think that was. I agree, a wise choice, because oftentimes that leads to bad outcomes.
Oh, I know,
right?
I know.
Okay, so talk about the first years with Emily. What was that like? What was going on in your guys' life then? Where were you?
where were we? Living in this little apartment. I can't remember where it was. It wasn't a horrible place. I'd been the one that had all the steps. I think it might have been the one that had all the steps. Of course, I was still relatively healthy then.
So you were in what, late 30s at this point?
Yeah, middle 30s. And as I said, she was tiny, really, really tiny. And I kind of panicked, to be honest with you, because I thought, I have no idea, absolutely none. But what I learned was to listen and to pay attention to what your child is doing, whichever child it was, and because there were 3 of you.
Were you stay-at-home mom at this point?
At that point, yeah. I didn't go to work until later. But she was beautiful. Claire was beautiful. You were beautiful.
So you said you panicked?
Well,
because you're so small, like you're just worried about her health.
I was worried about her health,
Yeah.
and I was worried about not really knowing. I mean, sorry about the helicopter.
Coasties.
I think they land at the hospital.
Oh, yeah, okay. It's probably
My mother was a lovely woman. She was very intelligent. She was involved in some things in the community and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. She was our Girl Scout leader at one point and that sort of thing. But she kind of raised us in the old-fashioned way where, you let the baby cry and, you just don't have to be there every minute of every day. And
did you understand that was, like, did you want to emulate that?
Not when I was 3.
No, like when you became a mom, did you want to emulate that, or did you realize, this is not?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
By long before I had children.
Okay.
I realized that they need more than that.
Right, okay. So you knew, okay,
yeah.
I want to raise my children differently than that.
And of course my parents, my dad went to, after he graduated from high school, he went into the Army. He served in Normandy.
Yep.
And he came home and he had the GI Bill, so he decided to go to college, and then he decided to go to law school. And in the meantime, he was, his parents had a house that had its second part of the house like a duplex. So my dad's brother and his family lived in the second part of the duplex. We had the little cottage that was just at the end of their property, and it was just this real little cottage. And then my aunt, my dad's sister, lived right across the street. So we grew up in this nest of family, which was not a bad thing necessarily. But my mother never quite got my grandmother. My dad's mother was hysterically funny. And she just had such a zest for life. My mother was very reserved, and her mother was very reserved. So my mother didn't quite know what to do with my grandmother. She didn't quite know how to react. Uh-huh. And there was always that tension between the two women. And, Grandma would want us to come over, and she'd like open the refrigerator and say, have whatever you want. And my mother would go, oh, no, you can't do that. And it was a nutty situation. But luckily, I paid attention to how my grandmother raised us.
Right.
Raised her kid, my dad. And I thought, no, that's the way I want to raise my kids. I want them to know that they're loved. I want them to be able to know that it's okay to have fun.
Yeah.
And, it's okay to screw up once in a while, too, because it's going to happen.
Right.
And
yeah, it's interesting what you learn from your parents about what to do, but also what not to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Lessons
go both ways.
I did not know until I was, I think, in high school. I am seriously dyslexic.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I had trouble with learning to spell, and I couldn't write my letters right, and all this sort of thing. And of course, I went to Catholic school. And one of the nuns said to my mother, I think I was in first grade, you know, Susan's a real sweet girl, but she's not very bright.
Yeah.
So that was my mother's game plan for me.
Yeah.
And she never had an expectation of me. She never expected me to have an expectation of myself.
So what do you remember those first years with Emily before? Like, what are some memories that stand out?
From when Emily was born?
Yeah, before you had Claire.
I just remember the absolute delight with each of you. Just, there's this little tiny human being, and she can do this, or you can do that. And you all made me laugh, and you all made me look at life differently. And you all gave me a completely different perspective.
Yeah.
And that's in general for the three of you, but each of you individually were very, very different. And I always tried to honor the fact that you're different people. I didn't expect you to, I never had an expectation of what you would do. I wanted you all to know to decide what you wanted to do. I worried about Emily when she went to university, because I knew how hard it was when you have this. She had dyslexia too. She still does. It's in a new environment and that sort of thing, you can get a little, you'd struggle. And she did struggle her first year, but she finished.
All right.
So each of you had the opportunity to go to college. You each all had to pay some for your education, but we did. There was as much. I gave you as much money as I could, given the situation. Mm-hmm. I went to a computer school after I got out of high school, because my mother made it clear to me that I was not smart enough to go to the university. Yep. She was real clear about that. So I went to this computer school, and I learned all about it. I knew exactly what to do.
Yep.
That stupid Bill Gates screwed that all up.
Yep. All right, let's go back early years.
Okay.
All right, so that's Emily's, 3 years old, you get pregnant again. And do you remember anything about that? Learning you're pregnant and...
Well, because I never thought I would
pregnancy.
get pregnant. When I was pregnant with Emily, I was ecstatic.
Yeah.
When I was pregnant with Claire, I was like, oh my God, again, yay, yay, yay.
It's not a fluke,
This is
right?
wonderful. And you know your sisters. They couldn't be more different if they tried.
Yep.
So I think the hardest part about having more than one child is that you have to learn how to adapt with each child, and you have to pay attention so that you know what that child needs. Because at 3, the child can't verbalize. But with you, for example, when I took Claire to preschool, then when we came back, we'd sit in that little TV room and you would snuggle up with me, and you were perfectly content to do that for a long time. And then as you got older, obviously, you were on your own and you did that sort of thing. But it was lovely, because for that short amount of time, and you were like a year and a half or something, we would just sit every afternoon and just watch cartoons, and you'd sit on my lap or something like that. It was great.
Yeah, that was great.
So in many ways, Emily got a lot of attention because she was the first child. And the learning curve is wide, and I had so much to know and figure out. And my mother wasn't a very good source, because she wasn't that kind of I wanted to be a different kind of mom. With Claire, well, you know Claire, she kind of took over her own life, She just started, she just kind of seemed to know her direction, and she just followed it. And with you were also very determined. You clearly had a mind of your own and that sort of thing. But you were also equally willing at that very young age to just sit in my lap and watch TV. So you were all different. And the only thing I learned about kids was I knew really nothing about any of you. I had to learn everything from scratch.
So looking back, what would you say in those early years you did well? And if you could change something, is there something you would change? I think when you said you've said this before, and maybe this is what you'll say when you did well, like letting us be like self-deterministic. So what's something you would change, or advice you might give to newer parents like us?
If I were giving advice, which by the way you'll notice I never do, I would say learn your child and let your child, this is a contradiction and I'll explain. Let your child decide what they want to do on a day-to-day basis, what they are interested in. Mm-hmm. It is also your job as a parent to set boundaries and to set standards. So you have to be able to do both things. You have to give them the freedom and the restraint, which gets complicated sometimes. But they have to know how to work in society. They have to know that you have to be polite. You can speak your mind, but you don't need to be obnoxious about it. Sometimes you break the rules a little bit, but you can't just go around, bulldozing through the rules. And every child needs to know that. And every child also needs to know that they are, first of all, loved and accepted. And if you make that clear from the beginning, I think it's easier when you have to say, wait a minute, you need to back up on this one.
It sounds like what you're describing is a parenting style I've been hearing about different parenting styles, just kind of like doing research on my own. And there's the one where you're like dictating, I want you to be a lawyer like me, which is, problematic in some ways. Maybe like it does yield good results for some kids, but overall it's probably more negative. Then there's, I think it's called the snowplow parent, where they just remove all the barrier, like all the obstacles, and like, I'll take care of you forever. Don't worry, mommy's got you. And then, they can't take care of themselves, right?
Of course, they didn't learn anything.
But I think I'm sure there's data out there to support this. I don't know the name of the style, but there's one where you're like supportive, but with high standards, where you say, and it sounds like this is what you're describing, where you say, you're loved. I want to support you in what you do, but you need to know that I have certain expectations of you.
Exactly.
That.
And to clarify that, the expectation is not that you're going to be professional or rich
or like you'll be the best at everything.
Yes.
Right.
It's that you do the best, you tackle something, mm-hmm. and failure is a part of learning.
Right.
So you have to learn how to fail sometimes.
Yep.
Without crumbling because you failed. And I hoped that I had taught you that.
Yeah, and the other aspect, you have to try, right?
You definitely have to put yourself out there.
But you have to try. If you're going to do something, you got to put your all into it.
Right, and
that should be celebrated.
With the clear understanding that sometimes you're not going to do. Sometimes it's not going to work.
And that's okay. Yeah,
and that's
okay. Like how you teach resiliency. So, I mean, it's easy to say that. It's hard to practice it.
Oh, of course.
And I've failed at it. I'm sure you can think of times where you failed at it.
I managed to screw up a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I think that, what you're describing is a good philosophy. So that's cool.
Yeah.
All right.
And I never wanted you guys to feel that you were channeled into something, that the expectation was this. I was anxious to see where you would end up, what you would decide to do.
Yeah.
Emily is a social worker. When she was going to Camp Fitch, she was always kind of in the leadership of her cabin or whatever it was. And she was always kind of guiding people along through that experience. And she did that with some of the kids she went to school with. It was just her nature. Claire always seemed to know what she wanted. And one of the things that makes me smile every time I think about Claire is when she started working at Hagerty. They sent her on some trip somewhere. She was in this old antique plane. Yeah. Somebody else was piloting it.
Yeah, I remember.
And there's this picture of her, and it's absolute ecstasy in a situation that no one would ever expect to be in. And I just thought, this is Claire. This is perfect. She has done something you wouldn't expect. She just accepts everything with, well, that's not really true. And she she has expectations, and she doesn't always meet them, and she's getting better about not getting too excited about it.
Right.
And you watch her with the kids, and she's fine. She lets them. She's relaxed a bit. It helps.
Yep.
And then with you, you were. With Emily, I had a lot of time. With Claire, I had almost enough time because I had Emily and we were shuffling back and forth and blah, blah, blah. When you were getting to be like 3 or 4, the girls were already in school. You hadn't started preschool. So we had that year where I had time to actually spend with you. Mm-hmm. And we often, because I was always so tired, we would just sit in that little back room and like watch TV or something. And do you remember going berry picking a couple of times?
Yeah, at the golf course.
Yeah. And I had a different kind of time to spend with you that I didn't have with Claire, and I didn't know about when Emily was born. So in a lot of ways, you were the easiest, only because I kind of knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
Less
pressure. Right?
I'd gotten over the, oh my God, I'm going to kill this kid syndrome.
Yeah, yeah.
And I could relax a little bit because the girls were kind of moving on,
yep,
as they should. And I don't mean to sound, I mean, obviously they were not still living at home, but
there's an age where kids are more self-sufficient.
If you watch your child closely, there is a point where you see exactly what that child is going to be like. And if you're smart, or if you're able, you kind of let each child grow in their own way. And that's how I always tried to work with you guys. You were different. You were all motivated in one way or another. Mm-hmm. And as I watched you, each of you, as different as you were, there was always this confidence that you all were going to be fine.
Right.
That you would find your way. You didn't know what it was when you were 13. Nobody does. But when you found it, or it found you, as the case may be, you embraced it and you've made the best of it.
Right.
And you've succeeded, all of you. And that's what anyone hopes for their child.
Seems like a good place to pause.
Okay.
All right. So next time, I think we'll do a few more of these. Mm-hmm. I think next time we'll talk about like the house fire and moving into us growing up and being, in our young teens.
The truth is that each of you in your own way amazed me every single day. And as much as I celebrate the fact that you are grown-up people, that you are successful people, I miss the days when I could just come over and give you a big hug and you could come sit on my lap. I miss that. But I suppose that's true of every mom.
Yeah. Well, I feel it too with Matilda. I know those days are coming where she'll be older and on her own and have her own life and everything.
And then there's that point in your child's life where their parents are obviously as dumb as dirt. And it's an amazement that they can, feed themselves because they're so crazy. And then slowly you begin to think, oh, well, maybe that was okay. Yeah, I could kind of see the point of that.
Yeah, and she's in an age now where she just always wants to be with us and, play games with us. And we have, games we play with each other, which is really great.
Yeah.
It's tiring, too, because, very demanding. But I'll look back at this time and be like, oh, I miss it. I wish we could just go back and you'll want to hang out with me. Mm-hmm. And have our fun games.
I just have to say this, though. I did have to wait a hell of a long time for grandchildren.
Yeah. Well, you didn't complain very much, so thank you.
Well,
hey, listen. I was the youngest and the first one. So
I know.
In my eyes, I am overachieving.
You did good.
So, all right. Let's wrap it up.
Okay.